So we will be starting in just a moment. We're letting people come in. I see Corey has come in. Some other people are coming in. That's great. Welcome. We're just giving people a chance to come in. I see somebody has called in. We have a slide up just announcing the program, which you can't see on the phone. And more people are coming in. Great, welcome. So I'm going to start getting started here as people come in. And I'm Mike Edelstein. I'm the President Emeritus of Orange Environment Incorporated, a nonprofit corporation. It's almost 40 years old and deals with promoting the sustainability of the communities of Orange County, New York, and its region, and also the ecological integrity of that region. And we're here today on a program that is part of Climate Reality's 24 Hours of Reality, Countdown to the Future. It's one of, I don't know what the total number is now, but more than 1,500 programs across the world that's been occurring in the last 24 hours. And today we're here for a conversation with Harriet Shugarman on her new book. And the title of our program today is Climate Change, So Much Kids Need to Know, So Challenging to Tell Them. And before I introduce Harriet, I wanted to take a moment and let Al Gore say a few words, the founder of Climate Reality Project. And I need to just get Al lined up here. Let's see, here's Al.
Hello, everyone. I'm Al Gore, and I want to thank you for joining us today for 24 Hours of Reality, Countdown to the Future. As all of you know, we're living through truly extraordinary times, and if you're like most people, you look at these challenges that we're facing now, the climate crisis getting worse, COVID-19 pandemic, structural and institutional racism, the challenges to the operations of democracy, and you ask yourself, what can we do? How do we overcome these truly existential threats that are connected? And how do we build together the sustainable future and the just and fair future that we want and deserve? Well, the presentation you're about to hear and the discussion you're about to join is about these questions. Your host is an incredible climate reality leader that I personally have worked with. And through their presentation, you'll learn the science behind the climate crisis and why it is having such a devastating impact on the ecological balance of our planet. You'll also learn how the climate crisis is connected.
So I've just had a report that people can't hear. So I'm going to try and start that over again and see whether we can. No, it's set for it. Could you hear it, Harriet?
I could hear it, yeah.
Okay, well, I'm sorry that I stopped it. I don't know.
Mike, I think the problem is people should download the WebEx app on their computer, and then they will hear. I had the same problem, but then when I downloaded WebEx, I started hearing the sound.
Okay, we're almost through with Al's presentation, and let me just let him finish for people who can hear, and then we'll go on with our program, because otherwise we'll use up all of our time.
Connected to the COVID-19 pandemic and is connected to the broader injustices and inequities, not only in the U.S. where I'm located, but in places all around the planet. Just as important, you'll learn that we have the solutions, and you'll learn how we can work together to solve these crises, starting with a green recovery and with a just transition to clean energy and the technologies that can make our world better in every way. You'll learn what you personally can do to make a difference and to help us create the future that we want and that humanity deserves. So before I hand you back to your host, I want to say one other thing. Thank you for being a part of this global conversation. The truth of our circumstances is very clear. We have to solve the climate crisis, and we have the solutions we need today. I know that we can solve the climate crisis. We have the political will. You know it's a renewable resource, but it's really because of people like you who are ready to commit the time and energy and attention and stand up and fight for a better world. Because of you, I know that we will succeed. Thank you.
So I apologize if some of you could not hear the Vice President. As was pointed out, if you have the WebEx app on your computer, you could definitely hear it. I don't know who could hear it or not, but we will try and post that. Actually, I'll give you a website later that you can go to and watch it. It was a very uplifting message from Al Gore, thanking us for being here and talking about our potential to achieve good things. So let me get on with our program, and I need to share my screen for 1 second again.
Okay, he's trying to get my old hand in there.
So I have muted everybody, but I need to make sure our speaker is unmuted. What I wanted to do was introduce Harriet Shugarman. Harriet is someone that you may have come across in many venues because she is a widely respected and recognized commentator on climate. She began her professional career as an analyst and economist for several provinces in Canada before she came to the United Nations, where she spent about 13 years working for the International Monetary Fund, as well as for the director of the New York office of the UN. And she helped plan and organize the 1992 Earth Summit, which is instrumental to everything that has gone on after that. She, in 2007, became part of the Climate Reality program, and I'll let her tell that story. But she has been much recognized for her work as a climate reality leader. She's one of the senior leaders in the world. She's received from Al Gore the coveted Green Ring Award, which is the highest recognition for a climate reality leader. She's also widely known for her blog and webpage, Climate Mama. And there are many awards that she's won. I'll just mention that she teaches with me and is my colleague in the Environmental Studies program at Ramapo College of New Jersey. And it's with greatest pleasure that I want to introduce to you none other than Harriet Shugarman. Hi, Harriet.
Hi, Mike, and hi, everyone. Thank you for the very, very kind introduction, Mike. And thank you all for joining us on the middle of a Sunday afternoon to hear more about the climate crisis, how we all need and must talk about it and take action. And thanks to the organizers, Mike, thank you for putting this on.
So this is a conversation, and I wanted to get right down to it. We just heard, or some of us just saw, Vice President Al Gore and his movie in 2006, An Inconvenient Truth, for many people was the awakening for understanding the climate crisis. I wanted you to tell your story and where it took you.
Sure, I will. And you know, it's so interesting because for you and I think for people of our generation, that was a seminal film and moment where I mean, it won an Academy Award. It was publicly shared in theaters and people watched it. But I asked my students, Mike, I don't know if you've done this with yours recently, who's seen it. And very few of them have, because, you know, it was in 2006, as you said. And so, and the information is even more relevant, but it's much of the same, right? The same things are happening, but only amplified. And so this whole thing that we don't know so much about the climate crisis, or it's new or something, is, as we know, having worked on it for decades, has always been there. Anyway, so, but to your question, I saw that film in 2006 with many hundreds of thousands of other people around the US. And like many of us, I think we want to put our hands into something where we feel we're going to make a difference. And it sort of just pulled it together for me. I remember watching it. I remember talking to my husband, Anders, saying, you know, I want to do something about this. And he found something actually in the newspaper at the time or something, that Al Gore was calling people to do a training. He was going to create this new organization, and Andrew just suggested I apply for it, and I did, and I was in one of the first training programs for, then it was called the Climate Project. Now it's the Climate Reality Project, and that really changed the course of what I was doing, because I had been working on the climate crisis, as you said, since the early 90s at the United Nations through the IMF. But it seemed really distant to me. It didn't seem to impact me. And it was actually doing that training and then sort of where that took me that brought it home to me, and has opened up many doors for me to be able to have a role and a voice on the climate crisis.
Well, certainly that collaboration with Climate Reality has been extremely important for you, and you've been extremely important for Climate Reality. I wanted to just also ask you about your website and blog, Climate Mama. How did you become Climate Mama?
Sure. Yes. Well, it was through that training, actually. So I did that training in 2007, right? You know, shortly after that film came out. And I came back, and at the time I had young children. They were in grade school. And I felt like I had this epiphany that all of a sudden the climate crisis was impacting my children. It was impacting my community. Whereas when I worked at the UN, it seemed like it was very far away. It was over there. It wasn't happening to me. Clearly, I wasn't, you know, I hadn't focused on it in the same way that the training opened my eyes. And I went to try to find more information online as a parent. How do I talk to my kids? What can I do in my house, in my community? And I couldn't find anything that was specific to parents online at that time. And so my takeaway from the training was come back into your community and do something. And I decided, doing things in my community, but I was going to do something bigger. I was going to jump in with both feet. And I established Climate Mama in 2009, so 2 years after that training. And we were, I think, the very first specifically focused for parents on the climate crisis. There are many other organizations now doing that, some very big ones that have taken on that role. We last year launched something called Our Kids Climate that brings together actually 60 parent groups from around the world to be able to mentor different parents that are trying to do the same thing. But yeah, it was 10 years old last year, Climate Mama, and an opportune time to sort of take stock of where I've been and what I've done.
So then what got you to write this wonderful book, How to Talk to Your Kids About Climate Change, which I certainly would recommend to any potential reader. It's just beautifully written.
Thank you so much, Mike. Thank you. And that means a lot to me too, to hear that from you as well. But I had been writing about that through our blog on Climate Mama for more than 10 years, or for 10 years at the time of when I wrote this book. And it felt like, as I said, this monumental time, a 10-year anniversary, to take stock of what I'd been doing. And also, I was hearing more and more from parents, I had been for many years, but that their children were coming to them with anxious, excited, worried. And I think that over the last couple years, and I imagine that many of us see this and feel this too, that we're hearing youth voices more loudly, whether that's, and I think part of it is from Greta Thunberg and the many, many thousands of young people who've been activated and empowered because of what she's done. But it just seemed that there were more and more voices. I know they were there before, but there was more and more people listening, from governments to parents to schools and communities. And there felt to me more of a need beyond our website and beyond the things that I was doing to actually have a book that would help parents learn more and be able to access in addressing the concerns of their children.
Well, let's turn to how you open the book, which ironically, or maybe not, is how you end the book.
Mm-hmm.
You open the book with these words: "We will be coming to terms with the urgent realities of our climate crisis for the rest of our lives. We all need to get comfortable with this fact in a very uncomfortable way." And in the introduction, you say that that's easier said than done. Just tell us what you were trying to tell us with that.
Yeah, well, I think in this day and age, or the day and age that was pre-COVID, everything moves so quickly, and we'd hear something and then be through it and on to the next thing. And I think many people still think somehow this is something we're going to solve, or we'll get through it. And if we all take action now and take it with the seriousness that we must, because we're facing an urgent crisis, I truly believe we will see through and travel through living the climate crisis, and hopefully in a way that is not complete chaos, because we're addressing it with the urgency we need. But we need to accept the truth and the reality of that fact, and that there is, had we addressed it back in 1992 when we had the Earth Summit with that kind of urgency, we would be in a different place than we are now. But we're not in that place. We didn't address it with that urgency. And so understanding that, we've got to get comfortable with that. And there's no way, beyond being uncomfortable with that reality. But to know that that is our reality. We are going to be living climate change for the rest of our lives, and so will our children, and so will their children, as long as we can turn it into something that becomes like a chronic disease, something we can live with, not something that kills us.
Well, that certainly is an uncomfortable analogy. And
Yeah.
This is a complicated issue. Can you boil it down for people watching into a few straightforward sentences, as you do in the book?
Yeah, you know what, I want to go to sort of an analogy that a colleague of mine, Catherine Hayhoe, who's a climate scientist, she's, if people aren't familiar with her work, you should pay attention. She has a program called Global Weird, and she makes everything understandable. And she described the climate crisis, or global warming, as similar to a human being getting a fever, getting sick. So our planet has been, we as humans have a very stable temperature, as does our planet. It's had a stable temperature for the last 10,000 years, since the last ice age. And when we run a fever, 1 or 2 degrees, we get worried. We know we're sick. When it gets 3 or 4 degrees, we'll probably go to the hospital. We certainly consult a doctor. We know that we're really sick. Well, our planet is running a temperature. Our planet has a fever. And while 1 or 2 degrees doesn't seem like a big difference, it is. We know we're sick. And at 3 and 4 degrees, we're really sick. Same thing for our planet. And that, is what we have done. We've created that fever, and we've made our planet sick.
So, I think it's important to make a distinction between global warming and then all of the consequences of global warming. So when we talk about the climate crisis, we're really talking about all the different ways that illness that you're talking about, that rise in temperature, it has symptoms and it manifests in all these different ways. And keeping that in mind, you write in the book that the climate crisis, that the planet will heal. It's just a question of whether it will do it with us or not. What are you saying with this?
Sure. Our planet has been here for about 4.5 billion years. And we have been on our planet, that for that amount of time. And the planet has gone through many changes. We've had a planet free of ice. We've had a planet covered in ice. And all of those changes take place over a long, long period of time. What we're doing to our planet to create these changes is happening in a blink of an eye. And, our planet is showing us, as you said, in so many ways that she's sick with the extreme weather events that are happening. But the planet is going to be here. Barring some major asteroid event that's really, beyond our realm of discussion at this moment, but we might not be. But the planet, is going to continue. Just whether she decides that, we have been such a nuisance that, she says goodbye or not, that remains to be seen. So when we say that, we're destroying the planet, or people say that, I think we need to put it into a different context. We are creating havoc on the planet, but the planet will deal with it. The planet is out of balance. She will work to get herself back in balance, but we may not be here as part of that as she works to get rid of all those problems.
Yeah, the way I talk about that is this being a habitability issue. What we're doing is we're decreasing in many ways the habitability of the Earth for all species, including for us.
Yeah.
And if we push that far enough, we're not going to be able to survive. But along the way, we will have increasing discomfort. So what do we do about this? What are the societal changes that we need to make in order to address this crisis?
Yeah, and I think again, as we talked about in making it simple, our Climate Mama motto, which I talk about in the book, is really simple, and I think it's something that we learn from our parents probably, and maybe many of us teach our children, is to tell the truth. That actions speak louder than words, and not to be afraid. And all those things are challenging as a parent, as anyone, right? But what we haven't been doing is telling the truth about the reality of the urgency of the crisis. And we must do that no matter the age of our children or whoever we're talking to. We have created a crisis on our planet. We need to tell the truth about that. We need to not just talk about it, though, too. We need to take action, whether it's small steps, each one of us. We need to move forward with those small steps, and we need to demand that those that can take big, giant leaps do so. So that goes with who we vote for, who we support in terms of companies, et cetera. We need to do that. And then we need to keep moving forward and not be afraid, even though it's the most terrifying thing in many ways. Once you truly understand what's happening, I think the basic reaction is, well, I'm just going to put my head in the sand, or I'm going to just pretend it's not happening, because what can I do about it? It's too big to get my arms around. And so you want to shut down, and we can't do that. So I think, those are just simple truths that I talk about in the book, and I think it can guide us.
In watching, I very early found a book by an author named Condon in the 1950s who wrote about that the energy basis of a society is probably the most important thing you need to know about it. And I think the societal changes that we face suggest that it's not climate change we need to address. It's all of the things that are causing climate change we need to address. And then it's all the things that we need to live with the climate change we've already caused we need to address. I don't know if you want to elaborate that point at all.
No, absolutely. And I think you're absolutely right. We, right there, we need to figure out how to adapt to the changes that are here. So we can't pretend they're not here. And that comes from, your town or your community shoring up our physical infrastructure, because knowing that we are going to be living this climate crisis. So we need to adapt to the changes that are there. We need to build up our resiliency to deal with what's happening. We need to deal, you and I, with our students, we teach the sustainable development goals, right? And for those that aren't familiar with them, because I don't think they're focused on in the US in the same way they are in many other places around the world, 17 goals that by 2030, that if the world community could meet, they're interrelated. It coming from education for all, no poverty, taking care of our oceans and our lands. All those are all connected. We need to be more sustainable. We need to be lighter on our feet. We need to do many things, but we also need to recognize that we need leaders who are going to help us get there too. That is not on your shoulder, it's on my shoulders alone. It's certainly not on our youth, which I think now too many people are saying, well, you know what, the kids are talking about it, or, we created this problem, but boy, we're putting it on the shoulders of our children because they'll have to, live with it as they grow older. And that is something we have to remove from their shoulders and from those people that say that, because it's all of us, that all of us have to take steps. And again, some of us will take big ones, and some of us can just put one foot in front of the other.
So you're advising parents about how to address climate change. Let's start out with pre-parents. What do you say to people who are trying to decide whether or not to have children? And let me just say that I've talked for more than 40 years that I've been teaching at the college level, almost 50, to my students always about whether they plan to have children. And what I find is that this is something that many people are unsure whether to do at this point. What do you advise people?
Yeah, and I talk a little bit about it in the book as well. And I've had some real heart-to-heart conversations with people considering that. And it's a very personal choice. And I think we need to respect however people decide to go. And I know, many of the young people that I've spoken to, and you as well, Mike, feel that because of this uncertainty about the future, that it would be unfair to bring a child into the world now, or knowing that we are going to be living this climate emergency, that would be unfair. And I think that is absolutely fair, and something to respect. But in the same way, who knows if that child that you have might be that child that is going to develop that technology that's going to suck the carbon out of the atmosphere, or help us move forward in that giant leap that's going to happen. So I completely respect the decision of someone to choose not to have a child. But if someone makes that leap of faith that we will be here, that there is hope, because we're that, and hope, we can talk about that. What does that mean? How do you define it? Because hope in a vacuum is just that. But if someone takes that leap of faith, brings a child into the world, I respect that decision as well too. And so I am with you. It is something we should be talking about, but it's a very personal choice. And I think you can take it from either side.
So for parents with children, you write, as parents, once the depth of the crisis is clear, our actions must be commensurate with the crisis at hand. Elaborate.
I think, similar to what I said before, and again, it's going to depend on the age of your child and how that manifests itself. But I think being honest with the reality that's happening and that it's an urgent crisis, regardless of the age of your child, we need to be showing them. They need to see you. They need to model your behavior. They need to be able to see that you're taking action, whether that's discussing who you're voting for and what that individual at whatever level of government, what's their climate plan, not just what they're talking about. If they're already an elected office, are they already taking action, and are they ready to go if they're not? What are you doing around your home? You may say, "Oh, I care so much about the climate crisis," but you're not discussing with your family your food choices. You're not discussing big purchases like cars or appliances, which should be energy efficient. From the very nitty gritty to how are you using your home as an example, to what are you talking to their teachers about? Are they learning about the climate crisis in school? Because they should be, and not just in science. It should be cross curricular. So are your children seeing you take action with the school board, with their teachers? Everything has to be through that lens that we are living a climate emergency. But it doesn't mean that you don't enjoy walks in nature, you don't enjoy seeing films, you don't enjoy being part of a family and living our lives, because it's very short, that time, this time that we have on the planet. So that needs to be part of it too. But I think if we advise our children that we do things through whatever drives us, our passions that drive us, but through a lens of looking at it through the climate crisis, whether as an artist or a musician or whatever it is that drives them, that's part of it. So, I feel that that's important for all of us. And then that, we're not lying about the reality of what's happening. We're using our best abilities, our passions, and encouraging our children to do that as well.
I got the sense from reading your book and certainly thinking about the problem that children know about the climate crisis, whether parents tell them or not, and that parents almost risk losing their credibility as communicators if they try and deny or downplay the problem. Parents need to be prepared to actually discuss it in real terms. I think that that's very much in line with your own thinking.
Yes, I really believe that to be true. And whether, even from a young age, access to internet or whatever, media sources our children have access to, you want to make sure that they're actually learning the truth, because we know how divisive, how partisan, how whatever the news you want to find will say what you want it to. We as parents need to actually learn the science. We need to understand it. We don't have to be scientists ourselves, but we have to be using credible sources to understand what's going on. And I try to do that in the book too, just, to give the data and the facts, the peer-reviewed information from the science perspective, the understanding of the different politics that exists, to whether you're concerned or not about the climate crisis, to the justice issues that come with those most often least responsible for having a heavy footprint when it comes to creating greenhouse gas emissions, et cetera, are the ones that are often the most impacted. And so we need to be able to understand that ourselves, because our kids they're going to hear about it, they're going to learn about it, and you want them, if they're ready, when they want to come to you, to be able to have that conversation with them.
Well, how do you deal with the anxiety and fear that may be associated with this for them?
Yeah, that's a reality and a real concern. And I know that many of my colleagues in the climate movement, you can go through deep depression about it, actually. And we have to guard for that with our children. I mean, certainly, we haven't been talking about having this conversation in the context of COVID and everything else that's going on, which only makes those kind of things, that anxiety, that depression even deeper, and something we need to watch for, not just in ourselves, but certainly in our children as well. And I think that we have to find a way to give them hope. And it has to be active hope through encouraging them, that there are so many opportunities to address what's happening so everyone can be involved, because we've gone so far down that road that there's not just one, two, or three things that we can do that is going to solve the crisis, because that is just no longer the case. If it ever was, I'm not sure, but it certainly isn't the case now. So they can be part of it, whether they're in grade school and they're writing a letter to their local mayor, or they're in, preschool and they're drawing a picture of what, they love in nature, and you're going to send that for them, to the company that makes their clothing, because they're not, however you want to explain it, or whatever you want to do, there's a way to have people, have our children involved in part of that process. But understanding ourselves that just as we may go through those same, stages of grief that we go through when we lose someone, we may go through those, and understanding the reality of the climate crisis, but then we have to come out on the other side of building hope and resolve, and be conscious of that for our children as well.
Well, that raises another question, which is, at some point when your child looks at you and said, Mom, Dad, what did you do about the climate crisis?
Mm-hmm.
How do parents prepare themselves to answer that question authentically?
Yeah, you know what? I think you take it from where you're at, and different from you and I that have been working on this for much of our career. Maybe you're just coming to it, and that's fine. And then you say, I attended this interesting discussion, today, and this came up for me, and I'm going to learn more about it. So even if to this point it hasn't been, right front and center, that's okay. But now that you've been open to it, then you have to move forward. And so I think, as you said, you have to be authentic. So you can't pretend you're doing something that you didn't. You can't pretend, whatever, but you can move forward and recognize as you learn more and more, and then involve your kids, and depending on the age and where they're at. But if they're still at home with you, in a climate plan, what's your plan as a family? What are you going to do? And then check in weekly, every month, however you want to do it, like having a family meeting. But the climate,
What would be in a climate plan?
yeah, you know what? Again, it depends on the ages of your children, but even from very young ones, do you have weather stripping on your home? Are you going to get your house ready for winter? Are you going to plant, trees or a garden? Do you live in an apartment? Have you, talked to the landlord about where your energy comes from? It can be as varied as your family is, but have it specific to things in your home, and then take it that next level into your community, because we need to reach out beyond that too.
I think one of the interesting things about climate change is the issue of responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
So much of the denial of climate change stemmed from not being able to admit that humans are the cause of the problem. And that issue of responsibility comes down also into this question of, so what have you been doing, not just to address climate change, but what have we been doing as a family, or what have we been doing as a society to cause climate change? Say something about this issue of responsibility. It's a very key issue.
It is. It is central, I think, to it, but also recognizing we are so far down the road of the climate crisis. We need systemic change. We need huge changes. And as individuals, again, unless you're the president of a very large company or of a country, that kind of systemic change is beyond what we can do as individuals. And I talk about in the book, which I hadn't realized before I was writing it, that the Keep America Beautiful campaign, which is how we started the
That was
recycling
interesting. Yeah.
campaign or programs in the United States. Actually, the initial board members of that were packaging companies, were bottling companies, because in the 50s, all of a sudden we went from glass and aluminum to plastic. In the 60s, we were going in that direction. And instead of the onus of responsibility on the on the company to clean up your mess, right? We teach our children, clean up your room, clean up your mess. They were putting the mess on someone else. So, there are some statistics that it's like 80 or 90 companies. If you took like the biggest cement companies and fossil fuel companies that account for, by far and large, the most amount of greenhouse gas emissions, if you take it back to its source. So then you might say, well, what am I going to do as an individual? But I have my students, I don't know if you do sometimes with yours, go through doing a carbon footprint. You do your carbon footprint and you find out different things about your own individual footprint. And that, I think, awakens for us that there are things that we can do, but then we should also remember the onus isn't on us as individuals. We have to do both. We have to make changes, and then through our changes, other people see our changes. We can talk to what we're doing, but then we must demand those kind of systemic changes that have to happen. So that's, at a country level, at a state level, at a municipal level, with the companies we support. Are they really walking the walk on what they're producing and what they're saying from a sustainable perspective? And we need to support those. So it's central, I think, this issue of responsibility, because sometimes we put too much, I think, on ourselves, or we take it completely off. And it's an important point to talk about.
So in my work, I often make a distinction between the cause of an environmental disaster, whether you can blame someone for it and they accept the blame. In this case, we're partially blaming ourselves. And then there's the consequences, which are myriad in this case for climate change. But then there's the issue of controllability. Can we mitigate it? Can we adapt effectively? Are we resilient enough to live through this? And at the end of this is the issue of hope. Can we in fact give people hope that they can address this issue? How do you actually, in talking to children, tell parents that they can, without lying, give some real concrete hope that there is, in fact, a vision of a future that is good for everybody?
Yeah, it's well, they're all complicated questions with multifaceted answers. But I think on the issue of hope, it's pretty simple. We have to build active hope or trust in intrinsic hope. And I talk about different kinds of hope in the book. Joanna Macy writes a lot about active hope, and that's creating, hoping that things will change, but because of the actions that we're taking that are going to move those things forward. And we have different societies that have an intrinsic hope that we as a human species, this will to move forward, to survive, is going, we need to trust in that, but then take action to move it forward as well too. And so there are different kinds of hope. Just saying, well, I hope the weather changes, or I hope, but what are you going to do to move things along? And I think to our children, that is central, to not just hope something's going to happen in a vacuum, but to show them that there are ways that we can move that forward without knowing, because we don't know, because we're not going to see to the end of climate solutions, because our climate system is very slow moving. So even if we stopped today, putting greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere, which is what is causing our planet to change, it's going to continue to get warmer. It's going to continue to have erratic and extreme weather events that are more erratic and extreme than they were before. And so that is going to happen because the system changes slowly over time. But we can make it less worse. We can slow that progression down if we take real action. So that builds hope. I think we can build hope that way.
So that raises the question of hope coming from the sense that we're doing something about it, that there are things that we can do and that we're actually taking those steps. And yet we both have seen the climate issue rather than being something everybody agrees on and we need to act, even in the face of reports that we only have a 10-year window to act. What we see is chaos, policy chaos, an inability to actually take action by our officials. So that hope is really couched in the context of frustration at being able to move in a definitive way. How do we actually address this issue of the partisan capture of this issue that needs to be instead something that we're unified about?
Yeah, it's seems incredulous to me that something that impacts each one of us in such potentially serious ways, and already is impacting people the world over with the climate crisis, because maybe we are able to insulate those impacts in certain parts of the U.S. where we live, although we can see that extreme weather creeping in or just blowing up as these fires on the West, et cetera. Everything is more extreme. Climate change is a threat multiplier. It makes everything that much worse. And that has been politicized, that all of a sudden that what if you have a D or an R in front of your name, or that you have to believe a certain way about something that's a fact, because we can choose to not believe. Again, it's not a belief, it's a science, the reality of the climate crisis. But if we, that isn't going to make it slow down or go away. And so that politics has gotten in the way of science. Unfortunately, we're living in this strange time in the US, and it's really almost, confined to our country. It's not like that, this in other ways, that the belief, the actions have to come, policies are set, but the science isn't questioned in the same way that has been politicized in our country. And so I think, again, being honest with our children about this, and it should not matter what side of the aisle you are on politically. And actually, there's something called the Six Americas Studies that the Yale Climate Communications program does, and when you and you can actually they do different surveys on how people, whether they're alarmed. I think you and I are over there on that alarm side, and then there's in the middle, and then the deniers on the other end. That section that's those deniers, since they've started doing these surveys, has become smaller and smaller. And it's those people in the middle, maybe they're not as alarmed as you and I on this alarm side, but that part is growing. And, the majority of Americans recognize the reality of the climate crisis, regardless of their political side. But the policies to address them, and our leaders, profess not to. That's unacceptable.
Now, when I read the Yale study, what I saw as missing, which I think is actually more appropriate for you and I, but maybe for lots of other people, it's not just the people who are alarmed, but it's people who are acting.
Right.
And it's not just the issue of becoming alarmed. Everybody can become alarmed, but how do you translate that alarm to action?
Right.
And that raises the question in terms of parents and their interaction with their children of how you translate alarm to action. How do you empower people to become actors? Because psychologically, the issue of fear and not being able to address the issue, being captive of the issue, not having control, is only mollified if we actually convert people into actors. That's certainly your story. You started having children and you realized that you had to become an actor in order to protect their future. So what do you have to say? How do we empower people to be actors, not just alarm them?
Right. And very important, because sometimes it does feel way too big to get your arms around, and then you just shut down. And that's something called motivated avoidance. I'm sure something you could talk about for us for a long time, from your background, Mike, too. But so in the book, I get asked all the time. I'm busy. I'm working. I'm putting food on the table. I'm helping my kids with their schoolwork. Tell me 3 things that I can do. And, as I said before, there aren't three things. There's so many things, as many as there are people on the planet, because we've gone down that road too far. But when I'm pressed to say three things, and I think they encompass a lot, but be involved in our democratic process. And that means, showing up to vote, because it's really important, taking our kids with us, filling out the ballot with them. Now we have an election coming up, but running for office or whatever that means. So being involved in our democratic process, then following up and following through, both with those that we elect and with things that we do as well, and planting seeds, literally and figuratively. So we haven't talked about this, but I know you and I have talked about it at other times, but literally getting your hands dirty, digging a garden, being in a garden, or being out in nature, or remembering what is changing around us is critical, I think, for our children to help, because kids also have, from a very young age, a sort of innate connection with nature. Reminding them what could go away or what happened. Um, so, and then figuratively planting those seeds that if we do these things, we are going to build that act of hope, because we are doing things that can help us, even without knowing for sure what the future is, build a future. If we do nothing, we know it's going to get worse, and we'll see it every day in front of our eyes. Building that act of hope, again, being part of our democratic process, following up and following through, and planting seeds, literally and figuratively, I think are ways to help grow that hope.
And I would just note that if you're gardening and you're improving your soil, you're actually becoming a carbon sequester, and therefore you are not just feeling good about it and connecting to nature, but you're also addressing the crisis.
Yes.
So, this is something that we've talked about, but you talk about a great deal in the book, your loss of your father. And I also lost my mother to cancer. She was also a smoker. And one of the things that you talk about, which is something I think about a lot, is the parallels between the smoking issue and the climate issue. Just elaborate on that.
Yeah. I lost my father 5 years ago to throat cancer, and he was a lifelong smoker. He became addicted to cigarettes when he was when he was in his teens, and he saw these beautiful ads, right? Cigarettes made you a tough guy, made all these, like, made you part of the party. The whole advertising campaign that went into telling us that cigarettes changed your lifestyle for the positive, for the better, before we knew, us as individuals, that in fact cigarettes and cancer were closely linked. But those companies creating those ads, showing us doctors smoking, telling us we were cool, or we were strong, or we were whatever we were, it was based on a lie, and they knew it back in the early 60s, but it took decades for that science to become open to us as the public. And we're seeing that same thing with fossil fuels. In the book, I take us back into, the 1800s, where scientists were showing this link between greenhouse gas emissions, which comes from the burning of fossil fuels, and the changing of our climate. And fossil fuel companies knew back in the 50s and 60s and then 70s were having peer-reviewed data collected by their scientists that showed them the link between the drastic changes in our climate and the burning of fossil fuels. And it's some of the same advertising companies and even the same individuals that raise this doubt about cigarettes, that created this doubt. And we see the memos now, because we're public access, that some of the documents that fossil fuel companies had, privately, these memos have been made public. They did the same thing. They're like, okay, we know this. but we're going to raise doubt about the issue. And the longer we can keep that doubt, the longer our core business continues. And so, my father was addicted to smoking, and ultimately he knew that that was going to kill him, and then it did. But he never gave up his hope, his dignity. We hoped in cures that weren't there. And we know this about fossil fuels, the connection to our changing climate, and we need to recognize that fact, and we need to hold those accountable in the same way that cigarette companies ultimately were sued and held accountable. That's happening with fossil fuel companies now because they've lied to us about it, and they should be held accountable. So we're seeing towns, communities, states sue those companies. I mean, that's a different thing, but or brings us
in this situation, though, I find it interesting that young people have become the critical thinkers, whereas our older generations are caught in our old ways, and we have trouble seeing the need to change or that change is possible. So famously, Greta Thunberg said to world leaders that change is coming whether they're ready for it or not. And do you see young people emerging as the new leaders in addressing this issue?
I do. I think we're seeing that. We're listening. As I said before, they were there before Greta. There were other young people, but I don't think the world was paying attention in the same way it is paying attention now to those youth voices. And there are thousands of Greta Thunbergs all over the world, in countries all over the world. There are young people raising their voices about the reality of the climate crisis. And, again, we can't put it on their shoulders. They are the truth. They are the ones, you're right, that are seeing it. They know it. They see what's down the road, and they know the change has to happen fast. So we have to listen to them, and we have to take action. And again, we must demand that those that can take action in a bigger way to create that systemic change do so. And they are telling us, they're shouting from the rooftops, we are finally listening. And as she said, as you said, Mike, it's going to happen whether we pay attention or not. So,
and in that regard, with regard to parents and their children, I love the way you wrote about this. While many of our children will follow our lead, others will lead us. Even when you might think that they're too young to do so, let your child lead if she wants to. She can and probably will surprise you. Be there along the way to help her navigate the twists and turns that will arise. So parents become partners with their children on this, not the leaders. The kids, in fact, may be the leaders. I just asked you for a final comment on that theme, and we're going to have to go into some wind down.
Absolutely, yes. As you said before, that we're all coming into this from different points. And many of us are coming into it because our children are asking us to, or asking us for advice. And wherever that is, whether we're standing beside them, behind them, in front of them, they're leading us, or we're helping them. We need to be there to support them and be there when called on. And I think we have to take that lead from them. And for that, we need to be prepared.
And this changes the whole dynamic of the family in a kind of an interesting and positive way, which is the parents don't have to have solved the problem. They have to own some of the problem, and they have to admit that the problem is there. But kids can become, collaborators in how this problem is faced. And so, Harriet, I just want to thank you so much for this meeting. I have a couple slides for a conclusion, and so let me just go there. Except that my machine isn't letting me go there. So maybe I won't be doing those slides. So let me just say that on the Climate Reality website, as well as the Orange Environment website, we have an opportunity, if people will do a small evaluation of this program, Climate Reality has arranged for a tree to be planted for you. That's one of the slides you can't see. The second slide is with regard to Orange Environment, that we have a permaculture program that we've been doing in our county that people can sign up for. And we have an upcoming program, and people can check that out on our website where you went to register. And I hope that you will check it out. And permaculture is part of how we learn to live closer to the earth, but it's also part of how we address the fact that we can actually begin to be actors in mitigating climate change and also adapting to it. And finally, the third slide I can't show you is about a conference that you and I are involved with. It's coming up on October 21st at Ramapo College, where we both teach. And that conference is our second annual conference on the youth climate crisis, on the youth climate movement to address the climate crisis. And that is an important thing. So, Peter, we don't have time to go to you, but well, since you're here, why don't I give you a voice? It's going to cut us off in a moment, I think. This is Peter Lai, who runs our permaculture program. I had a pretty slide to show, but what's the date of your program?
October 17.
Yeah, so it's coming right up. And again, there's information and registration on our website for that. Thank you, Peter. Anyway, the conference on October the 21st is a conference on the youth climate movement. It's the second round that we've done it. And you can find out about that conference through a link that that Liz Minova has already posted for you in the chat. And the links also for these other programs are there as well. So this concludes our discussion with Harriet Shugarman and our contribution to the 24 Hours of Reality program. Thank you very much for being with us. A video of this program will be on the Orange Environment website as well as on the Climate Reality website. So please send other people to it. And thank you again, Harriet. Thank you all people who've attended. And thank you for people who watch in the future. Signing off for today's event, Mike Edelstein from Orange Environment and Ramapo College of New Jersey.
Thanks everyone for being with us. Mike, thank you so much for having me here. And thanks to Climate Reality for having 24 Hours of Reality, and to everything that's happening in the community and that Orange Environment is doing as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Harriet. Farewell.